Covering the world of goaltending in and around the Stanley Cup playoffs. This is In Goal Radio, the podcast. Darren Millard, along with the co-founders of In Goal Magazine, David Hutchison, in his very humble setting in Vancouver Island, just enjoying the comforts of home. And then we have Kevin Woodley, who's on the other side of Vancouver Island, on the ocean side, the Pacific Ocean side, outside of Tofino, where it's raining, and he's surfing, and he's taking a break. And he's made time for us with his family on vacation. So this is really a cool show as we bring the entire world together in Las Vegas and beyond. And the Stanley Cup playoffs continue. And this is a fascinating time in which we see some goaltenders being bounced out, some goaltenders being on the verge, and question marks about their future. So I just want to bring you guys into the loop here. Corey Crawford was fantastic against the Vegas Golden Knights. Woody, does Corey Crawford come back for more, or is that his swan song?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think he comes back for more. The question is obviously whether it's in Chicago. We talked about this in the past. Like Corey Crawford earlier when he was winning cups in the first couple of cups, maybe got overlooked. But as that team has deteriorated around him, he's become a massive part of it. And his adjusted numbers over the past couple of seasons when healthy are like in the top 10 in the NHL. He's a massive backbone of that team. And it's funny enough, watching that series against Vegas, Darren, I kind of thought Game 3, Marc-Andre Fleury comes in and beats Crawford 2-1. And I said to a couple of people, I'm like, they're lucky they won that game, because Crawford, that was the first time in the playoffs to me that he looked like Corey Crawford. And obviously we know he was diagnosed, had positive COVID test, barely got into training camp, only had a week before the playoffs started. To me, he didn't look like peak Corey Crawford until that Game 3, and he stole Game 4. And man, I'm telling you, I thought Chicago was going to be a tough out if he could play at that level. And I think, probably Vegas, as good as Vegas is, they might have got a little bit of a break that it took him 3 games to get there, and good on them for putting him away when they did, because, he was probably just going to keep getting better, and he really is one of the top guys in the league these days. So I don't think he's done. I'm curious as far as where he continues, and if it's in Chicago, based on their cap situation.
Well, Chicago doesn't have a real... Yeah, what do they do for goaltending?
I mean, the problem is, can they afford to pay him $6 million? And behind him, though, you can't overlook what they've built behind him. I think a lot of us were surprised when they signed Robin Lehner last summer, just because Colin Delia showed like he was an NHL goaltender the year before. Kevin Lanikin, as much as there was still some work to do in the adjustment from Europe, I mean, last year he went back to the World Championships and won a gold medal. So there's obviously some upside there as well. Do you roll into next season with both of them? That's a big ask behind a team that gives up a ton of chances. To me, the only question is, what's Corey Crawford willing to play for, and will that fit with the Blackhawks? Because seeing him anywhere else would seem weird, and he's certainly showing how good he can be behind that team.
Hutch, you are of a certain vintage. So when you saw Corey Crawford making stops in Game 4 and 5, it brought back memories of Grant Fuhr, Bill Ranford, Rick Tabaracci. There's a whole lot going on. I mean, lifting his leg up. There was some Jonathan Quick in there. It was less relying on just solid technique and just pure goaltending.
And isn't that a theme we're seeing it all over the place? Although some of those names you mentioned, I was a bit of an old man by the time they were playing. So I'm an even older vintage. I'm Ken Dryden doing the split saves. Would be a little bit more accurate for my age, unfortunately. But I think we've seen a lot of that over these playoffs, and it's been just a vintage time for goaltending. I think we saw Markey doing that last night for the Canucks a fair bit. We've seen Carey going out on a limb a little bit more than we've seen. We know Lehner always did anyway. It's just a whole lot of that happening out there, and it's been a great time for goaltending. I think probably as good as we've seen in a long time in the playoffs. I'm struggling. I'm so glad I can talk to you guys, though, today, because there's no morning hockey. What are we doing without morning hockey now?
I know. It's bizarre. Let me ask you this, Hutch, because you're so dialed in because of young Maddie on the goaltending coach's side. Do you think all this just impromptu goaltending, make it up as you go along, react, is that frustrating for goalie coaches, or is that really great for goalie coaches to see, and how does that impact the evolution of the position going forward?
Great question. One we could probably do a whole show about. We've had some long conversations about this, and I know Woody often talks about, the rise of Russian goaltending and being less structured as you come up. I personally believe that we need to look at this the way we do a lot of sort of high performance athletics, and we have to do what I'd call periodizing the training, and maybe not so completely formally, but suggesting that there's a time when we are training technique and we want to give people the skills to succeed. But then there's also times that we have to let them sort of apply those in a more creative way and to sort of evolve their understanding and use of those tools. So I think enabling both in a kid's development are incredibly important. I'm not a black and white. It's got to be one or the other. And then the other piece would be that I think we're also seeing, it's not that guys throw it all out right from the first puck that comes on net. I think we're as maybe they used to. I think we're now learning to develop those skills so that we can, and now it's not on the second save when we throw out the book, it's maybe on the third save. So we develop that talent to be able to hang in there for a longer period of time, but still having that athleticism to rely on when you need to.
Well, a great example of that, Woody, was Markstrom in the dump-in against the St. Louis Blues in game number 5 that went off the linesman. If he's not a great skater and a good athlete, he doesn't get a chance to get back and make the save off that weird ricochet.
Yeah, not just a Superman dive, but like he's actually like he actually makes the save, right? It's not a pure, as much as it's a desperation save, he's actually watching that puck and getting that blocker up there. And then the save on Robert Thomas when it was 3-1 a little later. It's interesting. I think what we've come to learn in all our conversations with NHL goaltenders and NHL goalie coaches is the foundation and the technical foundation is important. But if you don't have another level and you don't have that compete and you haven't sort of built, you can train it, you can if you don't have it, you're not playing, and you need both. And so it's a matter of, but then the guys who go to it right away and all the time are going to struggle to be consistent. So there is a balance there. And, appropriate since we're talking about Jacob Markstrom, but when we talk about training and stuff, I would point to Ian Clark, who, and his interview on the podcast, what seems like forever ago, two-parter, one of the key points to him was that, you need all those elements, but that in his case, and he's got a goaltender who's 10. Here he is, one of the most, highest regarded goalie coaches in the world, up there in on that list. And he does no coaching of his son at that age. Just lets him go out there, compete and be structured and stresses the need for that compete. And we're seeing it in Markstrom. So, like anything in goaltending, you have to have a balance. But maybe we're seeing that. I don't say the pendulum swing away from technique, but maybe even more emphasis on having that layer above and beyond technique in order to succeed at the highest level. You can't get away with one or the other exclusively, but if you've got both in abundance, you got a pretty good chance.
You brought up the pendulum. We discussed Corey Crawford and Jacob Markstrom, who have been involved in the Stanley Cup playoffs for 2020. And then the other side involves the teams that were not invited to participate in the 24-team tournament, those 7 clubs. And part of that is Linus Ullmark of the Buffalo Sabres. And Kevin Woodley had a chance to catch up with Linus at home in Sweden. And it's a great conversation. It's more than 20 minutes, so put it on, have a conversation, and just let it roll. Enjoy this discussion. I joke because Kevin said it was going to be 20 minutes, ended up being close to an hour. But this is a great conversation about what Linus is seeing in the Stanley Cup playoffs, motivating yourself during this pause because he knows the season won't start on time at its traditional point of training camp. And then just discussing a little bit about life and leaning on your goaltending partner. There's a whole lot here. It's our feature interview on In Goal Radio, the podcast. Kevin Woodley with Linus Ullmark.
So, Linus, first of all, I think we want just catch us up on where you're at, catch our audience up on where you're at. Obviously, back home in Sweden for the summer, and what this has been like, the hardest part of being away from the game for so long. Are you watching any hockey? What's this process been like for you in the last couple of months?
Well, it certainly was a challenging time because you go home, you're expecting that, okay, this might take 1 or maybe tops 2 months, and I'll be back and to play off the last of the season. But as soon as we got the the memo saying that there's going to be a playoffs, 24 team playoffs. Turns out we're in 25th place. Yeah, it sucked in the sports kind of way. But for me, coming off an injury, it has been a blessing. So I can just kind of shift the focus as soon as we got the memo. So now we can put this sort of thing with my knee and the rehab and everything. We can put it in a long-term thing. We don't have to rush anything. I did 6 weeks in Buffalo, but now I had the whole summer. I mean, I got home in the late of March, and I've been working out almost every weekday ever since, just because of how the craziness about this COVID thing has been. So it's if I would connect to or reconnect to the things that you asked me, the things that have been the hardest is probably the motivation aspect to go out there and then I start 10 weeks earlier than usual, and I'm gonna work out for 3 more months than usual. So the whole process of I'm gonna be stuck here working out, not practicing with my team or anything like that. So I have to kind of dig down pretty deep to find the motivation and inspiration. But I just came off my second season, so it's been easier than I expected.
Have you had a chance to get back on the ice, or given how long you're looking at this break being, is that something you even think about at this point?
I just hit the ice twice. Had a goalie camp here with some junior guys that I just helped out. Had the opportunity to try out the new ultrasonic ones with the stiff knee. We could talk more about that later, I'm sure. But I'm my schedule is that I'm gonna hit the ice in September, because there's no real point for me to start working out 3 or 4 times on the ice right now, because it's still a long way to go.
Do you think about is it hard to look at how long it is? Like December 1st is the goal. It might, depending on how things go in the world, it could be even later. Is that like you said, the toughest part of this mentally, is sort of, even after all this time, to look ahead and still see how much more time is left?
Yeah, but the good thing about it all is that I do have a 2.5-year-old kid. So it enabled me to be with him for so much more and on a consistent basis, that I've got to know him a lot more than I would have done beforehand. So this is, I'm having a blast here with him and just doing all the things that I wouldn't be able to do beforehand. If you look at the sport, I would really like to be out there playing playoffs hockey and everything, but I am sure that a lot of the guys that are in the bubble right now is struggling a little bit mentally, especially being away from your from family and the kids.
Yeah, well said. That's well said. Have you watched much of it? And if you have, I'd be curious what you think. And if you haven't, I was running the goalie numbers, and it was kind of funny to hear some of the theories that were out there going into this. I think a lot of non-goalie media said that goalies would struggle early to find their game, kind of like coming off an off season, and every year the numbers in October and November, the save percentage drops around the league and the goals go up. I always wondered if that was just because in October and November teams aren't playing playoff style defensive intensity. How do you kind of see that when we see every year numbers dip around the league? Is that more about the goalies, or do you think that's more about systems?
Well, I would suppose that if you look at it mentally, I think Rask really put he said the great thing, saying that it doesn't feel like playoff hockey. And take a guy like, Carter Hart, who's done tremendously for himself now during this playoff, or Korpisalo, or any of those guys that hasn't had a lot of playoff hockey in them beforehand. Just think about it. If you go out there and you play in front of empty stands, and it feels like you're playing a preseason game, you're a lot looser and you're a lot you're not as stressed out as you would have probably been if you had 19, 20 or 20,000 fans screaming at you when you're playing in, let's say, in Chicago. So being in the same place, just playing around, I think that it would be a lot easier mentally. I can't say for sure because I'm not there. But I'm surprised that some guys did so well as they have done. But I'm not. I mean, there's been some tremendous goaltending, that's for sure, and I think that's one of the things that we do so well during off seasons or during this break, that people actually stay put and they kept to fine tuning their game. And it's not like we have to be a part of a certain system to have our game work. I mean, if our job is to stop the puck, and we can work on our things in a different way than hockey, like a forward or a D-man can do. So, but it all comes down to, like you said, playing playoff hockey and being ready and not just go around their thing goofing off. And so you just look at Philly, like they're flying. They're defensively wise, they're doing a heck of a job of keeping everything to the outside and just making it life easier than it could have been for Carter.
I was just going to say, yeah, to me, like, I think in the regular season, you're right, some great points there. To me, I always wondered, every year I hear it, right? Oh, the save percentage is down in October and November. And I always wondered how much of it is just because that intensity that we're seeing defensively, like a team from the Flyers, you don't usually get that from teams in October. You know what I mean? Sometimes it feels like it's a little harder to get to that level in terms of execution and defensive intensity. It may not feel like playoff hockey in terms of the stands, but at least some teams seem to be executing at a playoff level.
Well, certainly.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I haven't watched all the games, but take for instance, like you never thought that Montreal or Chicago that they shouldn't even be in the first round. They go out there and they beat their opponents in the first round to qualify in for the playoffs. I mean, it's just playoff hockey is playoff hockey. It doesn't matter if it's this situation with the COVID. It's going to be different.
Okay, so let's get to you now. Where, like, when I look at, your hockey DB hometown is, I'm going to butcher this, by the way, but is it Lugnvik,
Attaboy.
Sweden? And is that where you're at now? I got it.
Attaboy.
See, I needed the shortcut because I remember obviously covering the Sedins, and my first actually year covering the NHL was when the Canucks had training camp in Stockholm, and I was trying to learn how to pronounce Onskoldvik, and the Twins just told me to call it Ovik. But I didn't have that shortcut for you. So walk me through. I'm curious what it was like for you growing up. I'm guessing that's a smaller town. I'm
a smaller town. Yeah, it's not a smaller town. I mean, as of now, we're sub 300 people living there.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's like a small neighborhood.
Small neighborhood, completely right. I mean, I had more people living in my apartment complex a couple of years ago. So it certainly is small. It used to be a little bit bigger when we had running factories. I mean, during the 70s, 80s, people were actually living there. Then things started to evolve, and people started moving out and moving into the bigger cities. But for me, I mean, it was just a very carefree world. We had a rink. It was inside. We had still natural ice. It wasn't any fancy stuff. There was still our janitor was standing there in the middle of the middle of the field, just spraying water all around, and we hand painted everything. So wooden boards, we had nets behind it. There's no plexiglass or anything like that. But the best part of it all was that it was never locked. So me, my brother, who is 4 years older, we would always be there. It didn't matter if we had a practice or it was a day off. We would always be there, just skating around. Never with my goalie stuff, though, because that was such a boring thing to do. I was always skating around as a regular guy. But that just enabled me to kind of have that sense of having fun at all times and just enjoy it. And there was not a lot of things to do in the neighborhood. It was hockey in the winter and there was soccer in the summer, and that's it. And everybody was just happy with it.
So when did goaltending become something that held your interest? What age, and what was that evolution like for you? Because I think there's, we've heard it from a lot of different guys. Just the importance of going out and playing. I mean, at a time now where, goalies are sometimes in the position exclusively at the age of like 8 or 9. They've got specialty coaches. I'm curious when you started, when that happened for you, and how much you credit your success to, like you said, the ability to just go out and play and enjoy the game at an early age versus having it so structured. When did things shift for you, and how do you think that environment played into your development? And where did the love start for goaltending?
Well, I wanted to be. So the thing was that growing up, I was a player. I mean, I was shifting between D or forward, and as a goalie, all the way up until I turned 15. That was last year. I was playing as a forward, and just started playing goaltending full time because that was what I was better at. So for me, it's always been there. I always loved the gear, the masks, the whole goaltending thing. I always thought they were cool. I loved watching. I mean, Peter Forsberg was one of the guys that was one of my idol growing up, and they always they show the Colorado games on TV. So we put the VHS.
Yeah, the VHS.
We were taping it. That's right. We were taping it, and that's where VHS. So that's when I started to I saw. There was a lot of games against Detroit, but I didn't like Detroit because they were the bad guys almost. So I watched them, Colorado play, and obviously Patrick Roy was the big guy there. And that's where I kind of fell in love with being a goalie, because I always wanted to be as Patrick Roy. And then all of a sudden, there was another guy that was playing this crazy type of goaltending that I felt like, okay, this guy is, I want to be like him. And it was Dominic Hasek, because we had the same helmet. He didn't have a mask. He had to use a regular bucket almost. And I had that for a long time, so I felt a little bit connected to him in that sort of way. So that's when I shifted away from Raw to Hasek. And I mean, when I turned 15. Yeah, I wanted to be a pro. I wanted to play professional. I knew that I wasn't the top prospect or anything like that. I mean, when we were 16 years old, and we have just have your first like national team camps for juniors, I got cut off right off the start. Like I was not even top 100 or whatever. It was just so many in front of me, but still thought that hockey was fun. I attended high school, whatever you call it, gymnasium, and just played for fun and say, hey, if this worked out, it works out. If not, I'm going to be a veterinarian. And see, it didn't work out being a veterinarian, so here I am being a hockey player.
Well, I've seen the corgis on Instagram, so I know there's a love for dogs and animals in the family too. So that sounds like a good plan. I got a daughter here that would like to follow those footsteps, both in terms of the corgi and the veterinarian role. So I'm curious, the playing out for so long, playing as a forward, as a defenseman. Braden Holtby once told me that his dad wouldn't let him go in goal until he was 13 or just goal, and that he felt learning the game, not just the position, the flow, the way that other players thought, he felt that helped him as a goalie. Looking back, do you think it helped you as a goalie, having played forward and defense for so long as well, sort of reading the game?
Well, yeah, I think certainly that was one of the my bigger advantages, because it enabled me to become a lot more focused, and I analyze a lot. So for me, if I would just been a goaltender for all my years, I would just been able to analyze myself and not analyze what's going on in front of me. Because sometimes you can analyze yourself and you can say, okay, I should have saved that puck, I should have saved that puck, I should have saved that puck, I should have done this, done that, yada yada. But sometimes you're playing against elite guys who's gonna go top shelf from ridiculously angles that you think it's sealed off. You're just gonna tip your hat, saying like, "Congrats! Like, let's move on," and it's nothing you can do about it. And coming, that took me a long time to kind of understand, because I was so focused of saving every puck, and just I wouldn't let anything go afterwards. So I could let things go during the game, but then afterwards, when I was watching games, I just thought to myself, I should have saved that puck if I did this or I did that. In life, you don't have the luxury to do that sort of stuff. So I just kind of started becoming a little bit more carefree when it comes to my own analyzing.
Is there anyone that helped you sort of come to that, or did you come to that realization yourself? Like, because sometimes it's not easy. I know a lot of goalies that, right into their NHL careers, they'll admit after the fact that they were guilty of overanalyzing their game, and that could become a weakness. Who sort of helped you find that? Was that you on your own, or did you have a guide there?
No, I took the biggest step this year with Balesy. For sure, he did a great job of explaining things in how he likes to watch stuff and how he thinks about the goals. And all the things when I was younger, I didn't really care at all. So I had to kind of start analyzing, because I didn't have a play style. I was just all over the place. There was no real analyzing thing going on. But once you start getting stuff together and you're using your legs in a certain way and you're using your reverse and you have a game plan, that's when you can start analyzing yourself and the game. So I got to a point where analyzing everything. I was watching every shot. I was watching every save, goal, whatever. And it just started become too much, because it works maybe in the beginning when you're a backup and you don't play as many games. You maybe get 15 to 20 chances a year. Then you might have to kind of go in deep and watch everything and learn from it, so you can go forward and play those minutes. So, but when you start playing those big minutes, there's no time to analyze stuff. You just have to go with the flow and you start playing. If there's a certain thing or a certain movement that you're struggling with, you're gonna nail it if you keep working on it in practice. But you can't just go in there in the game saying, "Oh, I wonder if I can do it today, or if I just even start using it, if I take it away." Like those thoughts can't cross your mind, because then you're getting slow and you just have to adapt to the situation and not just get caught off just thinking that you might have to do it.
Okay, so you talked about some of your influences growing up and watching Patrick Waugh and watching Dominic Hasek. At what point did you, and obviously Mike Bales last year, and I know you've had some other, Andrew Allen is a favorite guy of mine. You had him in Buffalo for a little while, and different. What point when was your first goalie coach? Was that when you got to Moto, or when did you start to put those pieces together and not, as you say, just play all over the place?
Well, I've had a goaltending coach for a long time when we were younger, but not as a professional goaltending coach. It was like a guy that was helping me. So very old fashioned, just doing the old stuff, standing up. Then I got to the Modo's gymnasium, and that's where my real first goalie coach came in. He sadly he got fired after, I don't know, maybe after 1 year of working with him. He was also working with the big team, and in comes Ian Clarkey.
I know Clarkey,
who was Clarkey, a Vancouver guy. Well, he's not from Vancouver originally, but in comes Clarkey, who had a close relationship with Marcus Naslund, because they were in the same team working together. So he came in and he explained a lot of things. He showed a lot of things. There was like a whole new world opening up for me, with skate positioning, knee positioning, head movements, shoulder movements, all this, like glove hands positionings, all this sort of stuff that I love to kind of go down and dig deep in and just start like analyzing and you just work on. It was it was so much fun because it enabled me to kind of learn that, okay, this is so much more stuff for me to learn, and I have just scratched the surface, and I've gotten this good. So maybe if I can use all these things and just soak everything up like a sponge when Clarky talks to me, maybe I can get even better and maybe have a shot at playing in the big team. And 2-3 years afterwards, I made my dream come true, and then I play with the big team.
To give you the background, Ian Clark's also the guy that I learned goaltending from, because he used to have a magazine, and that was where I first got introduced to it. He asked me to edit his magazine. So all those things you talk about, the details and the positioning and all that stuff, I learned about goaltending for the first time in my 30s by reading all the different manuals and editing all the different articles he wrote about all those specifics. So I know what you like. I know how detailed Ian can be. And it sounds like you really soaked it up. And I think that's important because not everybody wants to hear all those details.
No, certainly not. And especially if you talk to an older guy that maybe have a certain way of playing and haven't been introduced to all this sort of stuff. And it's a lot harder for them to adapt and evolve from there. It takes a certain personality to do that. But for me as a young guy, it was such a blast. And Ian really helped me evolve as a person also, to kind of help me grow up together with with the next goalie coach that came into the organization, Massey Swash. They really helped me grow as a person, and that helped me grow as a goalie.
That's great. Now I'm glad you said his name because I've met him a couple of times at different symposiums, but I still can't pronounce it. I butcher it every time. So from there, Buffalo drafts you in 2012. You start to make the transition over to North America a few years later. What do you remember of that transition? Who made it easier for you, and what kind of things did you have to change for the North American game? Sort of around that time and around that era, smaller rinks a little bit. What else had to change? What was part of that transformation? What was the hardest part of that transformation for you?
Well, I think the biggest change was definitely the schedule and the traveling. I've done a lot of bus trips playing in Sweden, up north in Sweden, so that was not a new thing for me, but we also flew to the southern cities, so that was easier. So coming into North America, yeah, there's a language barrier. There's the whole living situation. So the more I got accustomed to and more adjusted to the American lifestyle and got to know the city, the staff, players, all the things that's not really hockey related, that's when I thrived, and that's when I actually started playing better, because I struggled my first year in the minors. Didn't really feel like there was something for me. It was, long way home. It was just me and my now wife at the time. Coming in the second year, we got some Swedes in the team. I had Nylander, for example, another guy, Carl Daniel, and that made it a lot easier. I started getting friends in the team as well, and we talked about it this year as well. Me and Belsi, that he asked me all this sort of stuff of if I had a kinder or a preschool set up, or if I had how's my living situation. And he really put an emphasis on saying that if everything is taken care of off the ice, it's going to be a lot easier to perform on the ice, because there's no hesitation, there's no question marks that you might think that you put away and that you're not thinking about, but they're still there. And thinking about it, I've talked to our mental coaches as well, and they say the same thing. These thoughts that you think that you don't have when you go in to play a game, they're still there. There are still apps running in the background, draining your energy, draining your focus. So if you can erase them, shut them down, that's That's when it becomes easier to go play hockey, because you just go out there and play hockey. You don't do anything else.
That sounds like great advice. What about working with a guy like Carter Hutton as well as a playing partner? Obviously, a guy that we've known here at InGoal for a while and had a good relationship with. Any lessons from him over the since he joined and became part of this equation? I know he's a guy that thinks the game well as well and has a great attitude towards it.
Me and Hutzi, I would say, like, from my point of view, we have a great relationship. It works on and off the ice. I think I've made him aware of some things that he wasn't aware of before, like equipment wise. I might have opened Pandora's box when it comes to that, but for me, it's been great having Huts right next to me in my development, just because he's such a carefree, down to earth, and he's a great locker room guy, and he's just one of those guys that you wants to see have success. And he loves to just being around the boys, being around the team, and certainly he makes me appreciate being a NHLer, like a full-time NHLer, more. Just seeing him, how he acts, how he presents himself, and how he comes in every day, just have a smile on his face, and then you just go out there and having fun, and it makes me relax a little bit more. And especially coming in my second season, you're a little bit tense, a little bit nervous, you want to do well for yourself, and he's just there, don't worry about it, like, shit happens, stuff like that, and okay, yeah, you're probably right. And it's just, we chat all the time when I get to the bench, and we talk about what's going on in the game, and like, he just makes me more relaxed and calm during games also as well. So we have a great relationship in that point of view.
Okay, so I want to get to the gear, but I got one more I got to ask before we go there, because I got to hear about the how you fixed up Huts. I also want to, I want to hear about the Stabila slide knee on the Ultrasonic. But I do got to, before I forget, you mentioned Hasek being a guy that obviously that you looked up to from an early age, or got to see on TV and maybe try to emulate. You get drafted by the Sabres, obviously a legend in that franchise, and I know I've seen him around, maybe not a ton, but I've seen him around the team here and there. Have you ever had the opportunity to sit down and talk goaltending with Dominik Hasek and ask him some of the questions I'm sure you must have had when you were a kid?
No, I'm sad that I haven't gotten to that point yet. It hasn't clipped, he's been there a couple times, but he's busy with his stuff, working for the team, and I got my stuff, and it just hasn't been we haven't solved that sort of thing. So I certainly want to have a sit down and just talk goaltending with him, because I think that would be a great opportunity to kind of go through his perspective, because everybody's talking about how he read the game and how he saw it, but is that the whole truth, or is there something else behind it?
I'd highly recommend next time you get you got to try. I've only had a couple small glimpses into it, and it was mind-blowing, some of the things that I think a lot of people assumed were unorthodox. Just, there was always a method to that madness, and it would be I'd love to sit in on that conversation for sure. So now let's go to gear. First off, how'd you like the knee? I think even talking to the guys at Bauer, they said like we've had a lot of good feedback on it, but I think, openly they said not every guy is going to love it. So it wasn't a thing where it was going to be an absolute. We've seen some guys in the NHL adopt it right away. Vasilevsky, Lundqvist, talked to Ben Bishop recently, and he was kind of trying both. Where'd you come out on it? I know it's only one session or maybe two sessions in it, but how'd you feel on it?
I sent a text message to Henry from Bauer there, saying like, feels like my regular pads after, but so I had them for 2 sessions, and they felt like my other pads that I were feeling like I felt confident in them after like 1.5, 2 weeks regarding pulse integrations and all that sort of stuff. But with these pads, it felt like I could go out there and play a game with them right away. It was such a weird feeling, because you're so used to having gear that is becoming better and better as time goes by. they don't just click right off the bat. You get a certain feel for them. You put the string or the straps, the Velcro, everything is kind of like, okay, how did I do this? How do I want it? But with these pads, this is the first time when I just strap them on every place that I usually do, and they just felt great. They felt like there was a certain pop to them. They sealed the ice real well. Felt like the 5-hole especially was a big difference for me that I felt with the knees, because how stiff they were, and that I haven't really gone into the whole. I have to talk a little bit more with them, and I have to look at it and see how they respond in maybe 2 or 3 weeks of consistent practice. But for now, I would certainly make the change. I will certainly make the change if I stick with Bauer.
Nice. Now it's interesting because it's a totally unique idea. You know me, I'm a goalie gear geek too, so I love it when companies try new things and try something different like that. And in theory, it makes a ton of sense. Where'd your love for the gear come from? I mean, you said you watched it as a kid, but and how did it evolve over time? Like, did you have the understanding right away, or have you built that up over the years? Or was there a goalie that sort of sat you down and said, listen, you got to know your gear?
No, it hasn't. Like the whole gear idea has evolved for myself. It hasn't been really anyone from the outside, except for my brother, that we always talked about how guys looked on the ice. But when I was talking to my brother, it was more about the players, like having certain gloves or like their sticks or whatever. We would always know when they switched. So that kind of transpired into me looking at other goalies. And all of a sudden you have a guy like Dave Art who creates a huge amount of masks every year. Back in the day, he had for the guys that follow Dave Art, you've seen maybe some screenshots from his old website. That's where my love for goaltending and masks started. I would always go out there. I would go watch these masks, and I would watch the photographs, and I would see them in SHL later on. And I'd say, okay, that's got that guy, because I didn't know that guy, because obviously you don't know the name of them. You're a kid, but then all of a sudden you get this foot into the door of the goalie life, and you have all these pros wearing his designs, and it's just becoming more and more, like, I would say I didn't become a maniac, but definitely a goalie gear nerd. And then all of a sudden it got to a point where I think it was Marty Turco who had the same kind of mask in Dallas with the gargoyles on his ends, who just, that after that it exploded, starting having writing down what every goalie were and whatever they used, and if they changed anything, and what kind of sticks do they use, what kind of tape job do they wear. And it got into it was just, I was focusing more on how the guys actually looked on the ice than the actual score or the game itself. So
that's hilarious. What in terms of, as much of its fashion and style matters, and you've got a great look going with Bauer, how much do you tinker with the functionality? Like, are you trying new things? Obviously, you tried the Stabila Slide knee and the new Ultrasonic. Have you tinkered over the years with other things and different setups? And like you said, when you dig into it, are you looking at how it affects, say, sliding, or how it affects that 5-hole? Are you really digging in on it each time, or is it just try a few things, find out what you like, and go from there?
For me, it's me and Bauer has had we've had a very good relationship ever since the get-go, because they have been very how should I say it, patient with me, because I know how certain things should feel and how I want them to feel. And going into it, I love the CCM/Reebok 580 glove. That's my style. So, but Bauer didn't have that luxury of having a glove that's kind of the same. So going into my first season there with Bauer, I said, hey, can we maybe get something going and maybe have something that's pretty similar to it? And it took us maybe, almost the full season until we got to a point where I'm confident with this glove. And because the thing is, then you get sent a glove, and then maybe it feels a certain way, and then you get sent another one, and it feels a different way. So we got to a point where, okay, I got different gloves at all times because it was always something different. But now, last season, when we had the stock, we had all the specs in order, it was amazing how well it felt every time I got a new set of gloves or a gear. I had the 50th anniversary gear, which was a completely different setup in glove-wise, but just because there was like a thicker padding, whatever, in that glove, and I didn't use the a game ready and a practice glove. I was wearing maybe like something in between, but it still felt great because the mold for the hand and how the shape of it was feeling great. So if you put in extra stuffing or padding, it didn't change how the glove felt. So that was a great thing.
Now, couple more, because it's been longer than I said I'd take you, but I really was curious about gaming. I know you're a big gamer. Now I say that from a place of ignorance. I'm not a gamer, so I don't know that world at all. But what do you like about it? Does it help you with goaltending in any way? Do you think it can? What role does it play in your life now, Linus? And can it be a positive role in terms of whether it's just an escape from goaltending, or are there actual things you think in terms of cognitively and reaction time and things like that can translate?
For me, I see it this way. I've played computer games and all this sort of console games ever since I was young. It's always been a huge part of my life. And I still game a fair amount. Not as much as I used to now when I have a kid. So, but for me, I have a certain way of seeing it. So for instance, I always play computer games on a game day, just because it makes me like you said, it keeps me away from the goaltending part, keeps me away from life. It keeps me away from being worried about what's going to happen next, because I'm so focused on playing my game, so I don't think about the game I'm gonna play later on at 7:00. And that was the thing when I struggled with as well. I didn't play computer games at a certain point in my career, and I felt I was getting so nervous because I started thinking about the game so much, worrying about the game so much. So being a guy that analyzes and thinks about the game a lot, this thing that I'm doing and what works for me is it just creates calmness in my life and in my game. So, and another point is that the games that I play, for the guys that know it's a game called Dota 2, and you play with a team, and there's a lot of thinking going on at all times. It's not just a shooter game like Modern Warfare or Counter-Strike or say Overwatch for the people who knows it. It's not just a straight up go there, shoot this guy, and be done with it. It's a more specific thing that it's a mind game for 25 to 1.5 hours. You never know. It depends on how close it is. So you always have to be sharp. You always have to think about your next move, kind of like chess. You have to kind of have a game plan. You have to follow through. If you don't, you're screwed. You're done, and you go next. So that helps me too to kind of analyze all the time what's going on in front of me and then adapt to it. Kind of like as a goaltender, that you can't just think that he's going to go top shelf because he might make a pass or so, but you have to adapt. You have to analyze, adapt, read it, and then go from there.
Have you used any like virtual reality things specific to the position? We're seeing, obviously the goalie sense arena now, where you actually strap paddles on gloves and blockers, and it's like playing a game. Or even some of the simpler ones like NeuroTracker or NeuroTrainer, where it's multi-object tracking. Like, have you ever used virtual reality or computers on that side of things for mental training, or just pretty much on the computer game side of things?
I've done some iWorks, uh, which which helped me to a certain point. But then it for me it was so the guy that we worked with. I'm sorry if he's hearing this. I can't remember his name now. Uh, he did a great job with me in Huts. I think he still works with Huts as well. So the things that we did, it went well. I certainly felt a difference. But then again, it was just another thing to do. It wasn't. There was another thing to think about. There was another thing to always have with me to games. I have to do this. I have to do that, and it almost cost me it caused a stress in itself, because it might have been a good way to kind of put time away during like practice hours or whatever to do it. But I mean, you're with the team. You're going to do what the team does. You're not going to sit there by computer doing eye work training when the other guys are lifting in the gym. You're going to do lift in the gym, and you're going to do your stuff. And you have all these sort of things that it didn't really pan out to be a thing for me to keep working on. But I'm still very thankful for the work that we did, because it certainly opened up juggling, for example. I never was a juggler before, but now I juggle almost every day.
Nice. So is that just that again? I guess it's that fine line, Linus, like between the things that help you get ready, and maybe too much can be overwhelming if you have too many of those things. And I've heard that from other goalies over the years too, where the routine gets so complex, they add so many parts to it, that it can become a negative. It can become overwhelming. It can become exhausting. There's so many different things they would have to do by the end of it.
Exactly. And I remember now, I'm just going to pull it in there. He's on Instagram as well. His name is Josh Tucker, and he runs Troll Focus Vision.
I was going to ask if it was Josh.
It's Josh. Great guy. Great Swedish. And he's been to Sweden a couple times. So don't take a lesson from him regarding to Swedish, but he's a tremendous guy. So give that guy a follow, whatever. He certainly has a good thing going on.
Yeah, no, we've worked with him as well. Last one then. Do you take a lot of pride in the rise of Swedish goaltending? We've obviously, you mentioned Josh being over there. We have some other people we work with, Maria Mountain, who spent times over there. Obviously had the pleasure of speaking with Thomas Magnuson on the podcast in the past, and I've been blessed to get to meet him a few times, and always a pleasure to talk goaltending with him. Do you take pride in sort of just how well things have gone for Swedish goaltending during your career, and what do you think are some of the keys to it?
I think that we do a great job of how we see the game and how detailed we are in the game. It's a very, like, goaltending is such a complex word, but one of the things that we might do wrong is that we focus too much on Sweden. We focus on what works here, in SHL, in the national team, big rinks, whatever, and how we play the game. So if you, for example, there's not a lot of Swedish goaltenders that goes overseas that just takes the spot in the national. They have to go through the minors and get adjusted to the playing style, the smaller rinks, and what comes with it. There's basically just, Henrik Lundqvist, who goes in there and takes a job for himself. And it kind of says a lot, because we have the fundamentals, we have the details down to it, but we're just using them in a wrong way, I would say. A lot of reverses that are, in my mind, unnecessary. There's more to post integration than reverse, and so that's one of the things that I try to talk about when I'm working over here with younger goalies. That just because there's a lot of young guys that stop competing if you have a drill when they have to go post to post on their knees and they miss with the toe bar, and they just kind of gives up. And I always ask them, like, why are you giving up? Like, are you going to give up in the game? And that mentality that the North Americans have of not quitting once it hits the fan is still something that we have to learn and not focus on just technique. Because I see guys now that are 13, 14 years old that have better technique than I have. But if they have better technique than I have, how come I still save more pucks during a practice than they do? Yeah. And there's a lot of things going into it. And then you have other guys that are my age who are, I would say, not technically sound or stuff like that. Or let's just take, for example, in the NHL, we have a whole bunch of different guys who stops the pucks, and they stop the puck in all different ways. There is no goalie in this league that are exactly the same. You have Bishop, who plays a certain type of game. You have Bobrovsky, who plays a certain type of game. You got Pekka Rinne, who plays a certain type of game. You got me, who plays another type of game. So everybody, we're looking at all these guys, how they do and what they do well. But at the end of the day, you have to focus on yourself. And at the end of the day, also, it's not about how you stop the puck. It's if you save the puck. Did you save the puck? That's what matters, because that's our job. Our job is to stop the puck and nothing else. I don't care if you throw yourself there and you catch it with your teeth. If you do it, well, that sucks for it's good for your dentist, sucks for you. But that's just how goaltending is. Adapt, evolve, all that sort of things.
It's one of the things we love about the position, Linus. There's no one way to do it. There are no absolutes. There's so many different ways. And I love that perspective. And I can't thank you enough for taking this much time to share it with us. I know it's late there back in Sweden, and I'm taking away from your evening after the little one's gone down to beds. So I just wanted to make sure I said thank you very much, both from myself, but from our audience on In Goal Radio podcast. I know they're going to love hearing this conversation, and thank you so much for spending so much time with us.
No worries, man. I can keep rambling on about goaltending for at least a couple of more hours. Just hit me up with questions, so I got an answer for them. But that's my answer. If guys like it or not, that's up to them.
Perfect. You know what? I'm going to take you up on that. We'll definitely have you on as a return guest for hours 2 and 3 of Linus Ullmark on goaltending. Thanks again. Best of luck the rest of the summer. Enjoy that time with the family, like you said, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you guys for having me.
That was a really cool, neat interview. Linus is so forthcoming and calm, casual. Just I love his town, 300. How do you say the town's name?
Oh, you're gonna put me on the spot. I can't.
Do you remember?
I can't. I can tell you. Hey, listen, I can tell you where
I'll
he
just
played.
insert it. I'll just pull it from the clip and insert it again.
Lugnvik,
Attaboy.
Sweden. I appreciate that, Hutch. Listen, it took me years because he ended up playing in Modo, and that's where the Sedins are from. And obviously, my first training camp with the Canucks was in Stockholm, as I mentioned to Linus. And so I had to learn, it was their first camp too, how to pronounce Ornskordvik or Ovik where they played. And that took me forever. So don't ask it, like 300 people.
Ornskordvik is a tough one. That's a tough one because of the intimidate when you look at it. If you just say it, it's a lot easier than looking at it and saying it.
And so Linus's is a lot shorter, but no less. It's no less difficult to pronounce.
I thought you were going to say that you struggle with Modo.
Yeah, I mean, some days I do, Darren. Some days I do.
So on the topic of Swedish goaltending, we have Robin Lehner and Jacob Markstrom posting great performances in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and then there's the flip side of just the continual evolution. So where are you?
It's interesting to me that, Linus talked about Swedish goaltending and how, maybe in his mind at times over there, it was a little technical or too technical at times. He didn't mean it to be critical. We talked about it afterwards, but just, an honest assessment of maybe that pendulum. When we talk about, heading into that interview, we talked about that pendulum that maybe it had swung too far to one side. And
And he, as one of his idols, was Dominic Hasek.
Yes.
So he might have
anything's going to be technical.
The antithesis of technical, foundational goaltending. Although there, as we said, there was always a method to the madness with Dom. But I do think that you look at Markstrom, like we talked about the compete he has. When you look at Lehner, he's talked about being able to play it different ways, about relying on reads, about being a little more patient and not as aggressive and letting play come to him, about playing an entirely different way behind the Chicago Blackhawks earlier this season in a run and gun mold compared to how he did behind the lock it down, no rush chances New York Islanders. So, again, I think the foundation is important, but you have to add layers on top of it, and that's probably where Linus was going there. And I think that's fair to say that both Lehner and Markstrom have done so throughout their careers. And frankly, Markstrom probably relied too much on athleticism early in his career. It's not a coincidence that he's had this rise in the past 2 years after remaking some of the foundational elements within Clark.
What do you think of this, the in-goal bump that we've given our friends? Carter Hart's had a fantastic playoff, and the number 1 seed Philadelphia Flyers in a position to, as we record this, eliminate his idol, Carey Price. Jake Allen back in the fold with the St. Louis Blues and getting starts.
Well, I think we might have given Jake Allen the in-goal bump because there's 3 different pieces with Jake Allen up on in-goal premium right now, and he seems to have taken over the reins as the starter for the Blues, at least for the moment. So we'll call that the bump, although it felt a little uncomfortable yesterday when we emailed out to 45,000 people or so the compilation of Carter Hart material, sort of celebrating his back-to-back shutouts. Went out a little later in the day than we'd hoped, and it was promptly after a few people started receiving it that Montreal started scoring a few goals last night. So I hope that wasn't the in-goal sort of anti-bump there, Woody. Any thoughts on that one?
I think that Carter Hart is far too mentally strong to be worried about our email to a bunch of goaltenders affecting what he's doing on the ice. I think we're safe.
Well, and we were good enough to send it later in the day so he wouldn't be reading it in the stall before he went out on the ice.
Yes,
right. That's very nice.
Clearly,
you guys have an opinion. You guys have an opinion on Alain Vigneault planning on taking Carter out.
Oh my gosh!
But then after the goal was called back, putting him back in after a conversation. It was one of those awkward moments.
That's exactly how I described it. I had a coach text me saying that had happened, and all I could write back was awkward.
Well, and after years of Alain Vigneault here in Vancouver talking about process, not results, pretty odd to see him go away from the process and make a decision like that based on the result.
Yeah, unless he's just got such regard for Carter's mental strength. And, sometimes we do say to goalies, you're not getting pulled because of your results or your process. It's the team results. So you could sort of argue there, I've already shaken up the team because they can see what was going on there. And now I'm saying to Carter, you're my guy.
And there was a conversation.
Yeah, so I'd be interested to know what he said. But it really was awkward. And if you're not a mentally strong goaltender, to know that your coach has that hook just about set, that would be really uncomfortable.
Well, hey, he gave him the hook the game before the back-to-back shutout. So if anything, we've seen Carter prove that,
right.
He has no problem shaking that off and coming back the next night.
Yeah. Truth.
Jake Allen taking over for Jordan Binnington. Woody.
Well, I mean, listen, Jake Allen had a hell of a season, .927 save percentage. And we've done a story at In-Goal Premium already on Jordan Binnington, and a lot of people sort of saw his raw numbers drop to .912 and say, hey, sophomore slump. And that wasn't the case. His adjusted numbers, courtesy of Clearsight Analytics, put him top 5, top 6 in the NHL. Jake Allen was up there as well, just didn't play enough minutes to sort of qualify in that sort of starters mold. But in the minutes he did play, the adjusted numbers were even higher. What's interesting to me, and we'll have an article, Paul Campbell's going to take a deep dive into the numbers on this, how much better, and maybe when you're only playing as often as Jake did, it can be the team you're playing, the situation, but for whatever reason, his expected save percentage is significantly 0.13 higher than Jordan Binnington. In other words, the team played better defensively this season, statistically, with Jake. And so I thought that was interesting with that change there. Both of them have had excellent years. Binnington just didn't look like Binnington in the first couple of games, and so you understand the decision, especially when you have a guy like Jake behind him. I think, beyond evaluating it, I love the lessons that came from Jake Allen's season. And that was one of the features that we wrote this week at In Goal Premium, was sort of going back to the conversations I had with him in early November, coming off in October, where he played 3 games in 5 weeks, won 2 of them, but his numbers were like .855 save percentage. Like, from the surface, looking at that, you've played 3 times in 5 weeks. The other guy's on a roll. You're barely getting to play. Your numbers, your raw numbers are terrible. And he came into Vancouver and talked to me about all the trust he had in his game and how everything was there, and he felt good about it. The next night, he had a good night in Edmonton, and he rolled from there to a career-best save percentage season, and now he's in the net for the Blues in the playoffs. And I think there are a lot of really important lessons there for young goalies, especially young pros too, to not get caught up in short-term results. Again, unlike Alain Vigneault the other night, perhaps, focus on the process and not the results. If you start chasing changes in your game based on 3 or 4 outings, and when that little round, vulcanized rubber disc can bounce so oddly, I'm not saying ignore bad results, but really understand, like, is this a function of how I'm playing, or is this just one of those stretches all goaltenders go through? And sometimes we chase change for the sake of change when things aren't going well. And rather than sticking with our foundation, there's a valuable lesson to me in the way Jake had such faith and trust, was his word, in his foundation early this season, and how he has been rewarded for it ever since.
Woody, I'd love that piece that you just did, between outings on the surfboard out there in Tofino. You're still thinking goaltending. I thought it was a fabulous piece, and as you just said, it's a good lesson for young goaltenders and for young pros. I mean, that brings us back to the interview with Jonathan Bernier, where he talked about the very same thing, having to learn about process over results. And I think that piece you did this week, Woody, sort of embodies what we're trying to do at In Goal, because it applies to absolutely everybody in the goaltending community. A pro can learn from those lessons. A young goaltender will learn from those lessons. Goaltending parents, you really need to read that article and think about how you're interacting with your son or daughter and evaluating their performances and supporting their development, more important than anything, as you see them going through their ups and downs. And coaches, it's great for you as well, just to learn about how you're evaluating your athletes and again, supporting them in their development. So love that piece, Woody.
Thanks.
It's been a great episode, and this In Goal Radio, the podcast, from Sweden to the west coast of Canada down to the desert. The Vikings know all about big journeys and long journeys, and we're seeing a couple of them in the Stanley Cup playoffs right now, and Linus hoping to get there one day himself. We'll let you get back to the surf, Woody, as we ride the wave of the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs on In Goal Radio, the podcast.